everyone, welcome back to another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel. So this week, my inspiration for my piece actually came from my customer, and she wanted a cedar chest done in a horse theme. So I'd done a cedar chest a few weeks ago for my sister, and it turned out beautiful. A lot of people were inspired by it, so I was asked to do another one. And this time she picked an image with a horse on it. We went through several different images, and she chose one she ultimately liked that I love as well, and I was thrilled to work with. So when she asked for a horse theme, my mind went in the direction of anything rustic and Western and some patina. And so I'm kind of going in the direction of an old rusty mine cart is kind of what I'm thinking. So we're going to apply some big cartwheels to my cedar chest. I'm going to use some patina. I'm going to show you how to paint in a decoupage paper when it's not the exact right size for your piece. So there's a lot of cool techniques in this, and the final look is gorgeous, you guys. So stick around and let's go ahead and get started on my first horse theme piece. Here's the cedar chest we're going to be working on. It's in really good condition and the veneers are all securely attached. Here's the image my customer liked best after I showed her a few different horse options. Of course, my cedar chest has an ugly skirting around the bottom, so I started out by unscrewing it all, and then a little tap of the hammer popped that off. My plan is to attach some industrial wheels to the bottom of this, but in the meantime, I'm going to work on it with no legs, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a good cleaning. I always make sure when I clean my piece that I come back and rinse it with water to rinse away any cleaning residue so that it doesn't affect the adhesion of my paint. I also detached all my hardware and put those in a dish to be cleaned. While I was cleaning, I did notice one piece of the veneer was slightly loose. It is part of the top, and I do plan to stain this portion, so I just scraped off the loose veneer using a paint scraper. I sanded the wood underneath, and it's going to stain and look just like it was supposed to. I checked the other side, but that one was securely attached. With all my prep work complete, I can go ahead and give this one a coat of stain blocking primer from Wise Owl. This is the light gray color, which is going to be the perfect base under the paper that I plan to apply and also under the paint colors that I plan to use. I left my top unprimed because that I plan to sand down, and we're going to give that a wood finish. This has quickly become my favorite primer. It's something I'm using on just about every piece. It's actually a stain blocker and a gripping primer both in one. It goes on really nicely, and it comes in 4 different colors, in a light gray, which I'm using, a dark gray, a clear, and then a white. So it's got a color that goes under just about every coat of paint. This is also giving me great coverage to hide that wood grain so that when I put my paper down, it doesn't show any of the wood grain through the paper itself. This primer brushes on nice and easily like a paint. I'm using my nice Klingon brushes, and it rinses away with clean and water so I can wash them easily. I went ahead and unattached my lid because I'm going to work on that separately. I took off these hinges, and I'm going to go ahead and give this a good sanding using my Surf Prep sander. I started out with an 80 grit paper to take off all that old finish, and then I worked down through a 120 and then a 220 grit. I was able to switch to some of the foam pads on my Surf Prep, and that got into some of the curves and crevices that are on this top. Here's a photo of my top all removed from my piece and ready to work on. I'm going to separate the body, and let's pay attention to this top. I'm actually going to use something called a weathered wood accelerator. This one is from Weather Wash, and weathered wood accelerator is going to gray the wood naturally so it looks like a naturally aged wood, which is perfectly in keeping with the design for this piece because I'm thinking of that natural aged mining cart kind of look, a little bit industrial, and this is going to look like this wood has weathered outside. I start by applying a thin coat of the Weather Wash, and then I'm going to come back and using my heat gun, I'm going to accelerate the process. Normally I just let this dry naturally, but it is really cool to see the wood graying under the heat gun. I did 2 coats of the Weather Wash and let them dry naturally. I'm doing a horse themed piece, and so I got this horseshoe from a friend, and I'm going to go ahead and mold it and make a copy of it. So I found a little lid from my kitchen that's a nice shallow dish. I'm going to place the horseshoe upside down in the shallow dish, and I'm going to make a copy of it. For my mold, I'm going to be using Amazing Remelt, and it's this dish it starts out as a putty, and I heated it in my microwave. I'm going to pour a little tiny bit into my dish here. This can be heated over and over and over again, so you can make as many molds as you want. So I'll use this for my horseshoes, and then I'll be able to take it back out and put it back in the container and remelt it again to use for other things. With that in there, I'm going to go ahead and put my horseshoe down. And then I'm just going to pour enough so that it goes all the way around the edges and gets the depth right. All right, that looks about right. So let's go ahead and let this cool down. And once it cools, I'll be able to remove the horseshoe from my mold and we'll see if it makes a casting of it. With the mold of my horseshoe nice and dry, I'm ready to go ahead and start casting my copies. I'm going to use amazing casting resin. I start out by mixing a 1-to-1 ratio of parts A and B. I'm going to stir them together in a cup for about 30 seconds and then pour them into the mold that I've made. Once I pour it into the mold, I'm going to make sure that I've got even coverage so that I get a nice flat shape on my horseshoe, and then I'm going to let this sit for about 10 minutes and come back, and I was able to remove it from my mold. The red modeling material that I used does stay kind of flexible, so I needed to make sure that my mold hardened nice and good. I couldn't remove it too soon from my mold or it wouldn't remove very well if they were both soft. So I had to make sure that my casting resin was nice and hard before I pulled these out. So I'm going to be applying the horseshoes to the sides of my cedar chest, but I'm going to arrange a sort of frame around them, and here's the design that I came up with. I cast these using a few different molds from Redesign with Prima. I'll go ahead and link those in the description for this post. And then I laid them out just around in this sort of swag design, and it framed out my horseshoes perfectly. Once I figured out my design, I'm going to apply a little bit of Titebond Quick and Thick adhesive to the back of my molds, and then I'm going to secure them in place where I like them. I did spray paint my horseshoes in a black metal spray paint, and that way they look like they're actual metal horseshoes. I'm not going to attach those just yet because I don't want them to get painted with the body of my piece. So I'm going to pull the horseshoes off and we'll attach those later. I found that setting my cedar chest up on its side and applying the molds while it was standing up on its side was much easier. I didn't have to tape them on, and then I just used some paint cans to weigh them down. All right, I've got this beautiful horse image that I'm going to apply to the front, and I'm using a blue decoupage tool from Grace on Design that I'll also link in the description for this post. It's super helpful with decoupage. This is Mint by Michelle decoupage paper. It's extremely easy to use. It goes on beautifully. It's actually really forgiving. I at first tried to attach my decoupage paper with my piece sitting on its bottom, but it was easier for me to flip it up so that I could pay attention to the face of the piece. So how you work on your piece sometimes makes all the difference. Once it was setting on its back, I had a much better view of the paper and it was much easier to lay. So I just worked myself aside from one side to the other using my decoupage tool. I am applying my paper using a wallpaper adhesive. This is Roman 543 wallpaper adhesive, and I get this from my local Lowe's store. This is a thinner paper. It's a tissue paper weight, and so I only applied my adhesive to my piece itself. I did not back butter my paper. I tried to preserve as much of the horse image as I could by centering him on the front of my cedar chest, making sure that I didn't cut off either the head, and I only lost a small portion of the back legs. I went right over the top of my lock attachment, and then I came back and I just slit that with a razor blade to go around the lock assembly. Once I had my paper all attached and laid out with the blue tool, I came back and I just used a piece of sandpaper and I sanded off the edges of my paper so that I had a nice clean cut edge. I used a little bit of extra glue along the very edges of the paper, just lifted them up and put a little bit more adhesive under there to make sure that my edges are all nice and applied. Because I plan to paint over these edges, I want them to look seamless with the body of my furniture piece. So here I am just using that sanding block and I'm pulling away the bottom and the top portion of this paper. That'll be the portion that I don't use. The one struggle I did have was that I used the wallpaper adhesive underneath the image, but on the portions that I ended up sanding away, they never got soft from that wallpaper adhesive, and so they didn't have the same stretch as the main body of the paper that I was actually using. So it was actually much easier to work with when I got rid of those excess pieces of paper. When you order your Mint by Michelle paper, it comes with this extra sheet in the package with it, and you lay this over your image, and you can use this to help you flatten out the image. So don't throw that extra sheet away. Once my paper was laid, I just came back with a neutral gray. This is called weathervane, and I just painted in the edges of my piece. This does not have to be perfect. It was just to get some paint on, so when I come back tomorrow to perfect my finish, it's got some color. Here are the cool industrial wheels that I attached to the bottom. I just applied these using 4 screws, but they were a little new and shiny looking, and I didn't really like that. I wanted to age them a little bit. So I took a little bit of my Wiseout paint, and this color is black, and I just blackened the cartwheels and then wiped it away using a rag, and it just darkened the color so they looked a little more worn. These caster wheels are from Lowe's, but you can also find these on Amazon as well. All right, I started out painting in my image. This is the line where my image ends, just so that I had some paint on my surface because my second coat is going to stick better. So this was just some gray paint just to put paint on the surface, and now I'm going to start blending this in. The three colors that I'm using are Weisel paint in weathervane, gray linen, and limestone. So I'm going to start out, and actually I'm going to use some black too. I'm going to start out, and my edges are going to get darker because I want it to slowly shade as I go out to the piece. This color here, I found that my closest color is the weathervane. So I'm going to get my brush in a little bit of that, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of water. When I'm painting in an image, I will actually paint further onto the image than I really need to go. I'm not just going to keep it on that line because I want to blend it into that paper. And as the paint starts fading out on my brush, it softens and it will give me that soft look that goes into the image. And then I'm going to come in with a little bit of my black on the edge. It's going to take 2 coats to get me the coverage that I want on this. And then I'm actually going to, I think, do a little bit of a lighter spot in there so that it's not super dark, because I do like the inconsistency of the grayscale in this image. And I'm just using a swirling motion because it gives me that sort of soft, cloudy effect that I want between my colors. And then I'm dipping back into my weathervane again. All right, I don't want my black to be such a pure black because it's a little harsh, so I'm mixing it into a little bit of the weathervane along the edges. So I like how this looks. And I already did the other end. I'm going to let this dry and go ahead and put some paint on the sides, and then I'll come back and I'm going to do another coat on this as well. All right, after my molds dried, I went ahead and added a base just of the weathervane, just so I had some color on here. But now I want to start blending this in just like I did with my image. And I do have some horseshoe molds that are going to go on here. They're already painted, so I'm going to apply those after my painted finish. So I want to make this center sort of lighter. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of my limestone. And again, this is going to take me 2 coats. And I'm just going to sort of make a light area in the center that's going to be the backdrop for those horseshoes when I attach them. I am finding that I really like this Weisel brush. It gives me a nice swirl without pulling my paint off the surface at the same time. This could be a really good blending brush. I just opened this one tonight, so it's actually my first time using this brush, and I really am liking it. All right, and then I'm going to fade out. So this is the limestone. Let's go with a little bit of the gray linen. I'm going to come back with a little bit of my limestone and just keep that nice and light. Blend that into my gray linen. All right, and then I'm going to go to my darker color. All right, it is my lucky day. I have a second one of these round brushes from Weisel. This is their premium round brush in the 1.5 inch size, and I love it. I just used 3 different brushes for this, and this was by far the best for this finish. I'm gonna give myself a little bit of water because I walked away for a minute. My paint starts to set up. That is an amazing blending brush, you guys. This is my first time using this brush, and I'm slowly finding my favorites as far as brushes go, but I think this is gonna be a blender for me. All right, so I've got my darkened edges. Let's go ahead and do down here. And then I'll add some black just on the very, very edges, just so it ties in with the black that's going to wrap the corner from the front. Just dipping into the black along the edges, going to give myself a little bit of water. And just like that. With my paint all complete, I'm ready to come back and attach my molds of my horseshoes. I'm going to apply my same Titebond Quick and Thick adhesive to the back, find my placement for my horseshoes, and I'm going to tape these into place to hold them while the glue dries. I didn't measure it all, and I wanted each side to be slightly different so it looked a little organic and rustic. So I just eyeballed my horseshoes into place, one slightly lower than the other, but I love the placement of these inside the wreath around the edges. It kind of frames them out. And here you can see why I wanted to leave the horseshoes spray painted in the metal finish against the body of my painted furniture piece. With my horseshoes all attached, I want to go ahead and glaze these molds. So I did apply a clear coat so my paint is nice and sealed. And now I'm coming back with a little bit of Wise Owl glaze in black. And I'm just going to brush it into all the crevices of my mold using an artist brush. Once all those details are covered, I'm coming back with a dry rag and I'm just going to wipe away the excess glaze. You can see how those dark details just make this pop against the painted body. Now I'm going to come back and do the wreath that's around the edge of my horseshoes. I repeat the same process over top of my sealed paint. I'm just brushing the glaze into all the details. Once they're covered, I'm going to come back with my dry rag and wipe away any excess glaze, and then I can clean it up using a wet wipe. Baby wipes, or I actually like to use the cleaning wipes from Costco, work great to clean up any excess glaze. This is a perfect view right here. You can see from one side to the other the difference that the glaze makes on all those details. So now I want to add some patina to the body of this piece. I'm going to use some patina paint from Modern Masters. This is their iron patina paint, and I can brush it on right over the top of my painted finish. I'm actually using a silicone basting brush, and I like to put on my iron patina with this because it looks like kind of a scratched and drippy finish. Now when I put the reactive spray on this patina paint, it's actually going to turn into rust. And so I want it to look like this, this old mining cart has kind of rusted out in the weather and is starting to drip down the front of my piece, but the basting brush gives it the most natural looking drips. I'm just going to work my way around all the sides of my piece, pulling from the top down a little bit of my patina paint. Once I've got it where I want it, I come back with the reactive spray and I'm just going to spray it over the top of my patina paint and let that dry. As it dries overnight, it's going to start to create the rusty tones that are in a rusted finish, and it actually adds a little bit of texture in that patina paint and looks like authentic rust when you're done. In some areas, I used a sort of cross-hatching motion with my basting brush, and it just gives this sort of scratching look so that it looks like the rust has naturally occurred in those areas. I did end up using the tiniest bit of copper patina paint also from Modern Masters, and I just brushed that right over top of the rust. With my patina paint all done and dry, I did want to sort of exaggerate the colors in it, in that rust and that copper patina. So I came back with a little bit of colored gilding waxes, and I'm just going to use my finger and apply them over the top. I ended up using this patina green color and also a bronze. Here is the completed piece. I went ahead and sprayed this in 2 coats of clear coat. I love the contrast of the rusty colors in my patina paint up against the black and white design. This one's beautiful. You guys can find links for everything I use in the description for this post, and more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube, and my website at brushbybrandy.com.